Good morning. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. And joining us this morning is a new member of the Washington Post's new White House team, Annie Linsky. She covered the 2020 campaign is one of our go-to people when it comes to the Biden world. Annie, welcome back to First Look. And of course, we're just going to jump right in and talk about the big scoop that you scored touring President Biden's Oval Office before President Biden even got to see his Oval Office. How'd you get that?
It was a very special experience, and the Biden folks had actually given me a scoop earlier in the year, and they just loved the way it turned out about an elevator operator who they were including in the DNC. And so I think we had a lot of, that was a really fun piece and actually a very poignant piece. And so I think that's the reason that they asked me if I would like to do this, have this tour of the Oval Office. And it came together in the sort of days before the inauguration. And so it was so special to be able to do it.
So one of the things, the big story out of President Biden's Oval Office is the bust of Cesar Chavez behind him, on the desk behind him. What other things did you see that morning that stood out to you?
So one of the things that I sort of admired the most, or thought was the most fun, is the way that Biden hung Hamilton, a portrait of Hamilton and a portrait of Thomas Jefferson, sort of right on top of one another, and they're paired together. And he did that because he wanted to make a point about discourse in America, and that these are two leaders, two of our founders, who disagreed on many, many things, and they famously had debates. But Biden's point is, through those debates, the country is a better place. So people have kind of joked to me that he didn't put Hamilton and Burr together because that was sort of the kind of animosity he doesn't want to see. But having Hamilton and Jefferson together, two great thinkers who had a profound impact on the country, but disagreed, and that disagreement is something that can be productive if it's channeled in an appropriate way. So I really liked that. I also thought it was quite meaningful how he had busts of two of his heroes, two people who had huge impacts on the civil rights movement. Bobby Kennedy and, of course, Martin Luther King. And this sort of the undercurrent here, which, the Biden's aide who gave me this tour, this 20-minute tour shortly before Biden walked in, was, the undercurrent here is both men also were assassinated. And that was left unsaid, but it was certainly on my mind when I thought about these are two important figures that will be in the White House, in this very important room in the White House.
And the other thing about Kennedy and it was MLK and Bobby Kennedy, right?
That's right.
Right, and also Rosa Parks, which jumped in my head and stopped me. But the other thing about Kennedy and King is that they were central figures in the civil rights movement, and they weren't always like this. They went like this many, many times. Another thing that's in the Oval Office that you reported on, a massive portrait of FDR. What's the significance of that?
Biden has, especially since March, February, March timeframe, has really talked a lot about FDR's presidency. And to me, seeing it as the sort of centerpiece of the office is, a message that Biden is sort of hammering home, which is that this is a president who who led the country through a dark, dark time, and was able to come out of it and able to bring the country out of it into a stronger posture. But it's also a signal about Biden's philosophy of governing, that he does want to have huge legislative consequence, which FDR, of course, did, sort of creating through legislation and through his actions the kind of modern administrative state. It's a state that Trump's administration tried very hard to dismantle. But Biden is saying that he's going to have a very different approach than Trump did, by sort of, lionizing somebody like FDR and elevating him and making him so central in his Oval Office. So that was really just fascinating to see kind of the rhetoric that I've heard from Biden over the last year, sort of all, in portrait form right there. He will be staring at that portrait when he sits at the Resolute desk.
And so once you left the Oval Office and President Biden entered the Oval Office, he got to work right away, signing executive orders left and right. What other immediate changes can we expect from the Biden administration? We're only, what, 2 days in officially?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm working on a piece about this for the weekend, but the amount of, you know, this flurry of activity, 17 executive orders that are sort of running the gamut from re-entering the Paris Climate Accords, moving towards re-entering an Iran deal. There's just a flurry of activity that Biden did immediately. And what is interesting to me is you have these sort of 17 executive orders, but the work to get that done started, really before Biden even clinched the nomination formally. So you have this one day where 10 months of work is just sort of sealed in a single moment. And another piece, a really important piece for Biden, of course, is the coronavirus. And he put a whole slew of actions immediately to make it easier for him. At least he's hoping it'll make it easier for testing, for vaccinations, for production of goods that that PPE that needs to be done.
Speaking of coronavirus and the big $1.9 trillion stimulus package, there isn't even agreement among Democrats about what to do with that. So what do you think of the possibilities or the prospects of that stimulus package actually going from package to law?
Well, I think the likelihood of it sort of as written right now becoming law is probably fairly unlikely. But I think what it is the statement of what he would like to do, and I think there's going to be a lot of changes. Now, Biden has made it very clear, not only in his rhetoric, but his actions, that he would like to do a package with Republicans. He talked about it with McConnell. He's seen McConnell several times now in the last few hours, really, and said that he's sort of spoken about his agenda in broad terms, but not the specifics of the legislation. There are things that Republicans really don't like about it. The minimum wage piece is one that I'm sure will become a bit of a flashpoint. The legislation increases the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but there are pieces of it that there could be some sort of some agreement on. So McConnell has signaled some willingness to work with him, and McConnell, of course, is not the majority leader anymore. But I think that it is a piece of legislation or a concept that Biden would like to have bipartisan support. He would like buy-in from at least some Republicans, and then, to your point, probably will need it in order to get this thing passed. Of course, it is the sort of fallback is Democrats can always use a maneuver called reconciliation. They would have to strip away parts of it, but there are big chunks of that legislation that could be passed with only Democratic votes, with only 50 votes. So there's a multi-track strategy that Biden is using at this moment.
And we've run out of time, but I have to ask you two quick questions. One, the thinking within the Biden administration when it comes to the impeachment trial, am I correct in thinking that the Biden administration wants to keep whatever is happening over there on Capitol Hill when it comes to the impeachment trial at more than arm's length?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that is certainly what they're saying is, look, Congress can do this. This is Congress's prerogative. Biden is not stepping in to say don't do it, but he has said repeatedly Congress should hit the ground running on my agenda. And when he lays out his agenda, impeachment is not one of the talking points.
And then the second quick question: when it comes to the ending the filibuster, in the Senate, the 60 vote rule that's upended everything in terms of getting anything done. Has the Biden administration or President Biden staked out a position on that, whether that's something they'd actually like to see happen?
He's been a bit coy on that. I mean, initially
Hmm.
he said no, absolutely not. He's a Senate institutionalist. That has shifted. He signaled openness to do it, particularly in the wake of Obama coming out and saying that he believed that it should be jettisoned, that had been used for racist purposes in the past. And there is sort of a rethinking on the left about the filibuster. It's moving away from this as an institution piece of Americana and an important part of our institutions to this has been used to keep racist policies in place for many years, and focusing on those that use of the filibuster. So Biden has changed his tune on that and signaled openness to it. I think the issue probably is more in the Senate and whether there are enough Democratic senators at this point who agree.
All right, Annie Linsky, the Washington Post, White House, new White House team. Thank you very much for coming back to First Look.
Thank you.
And now let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we'll find my colleagues, deputy editorial page editor and columnist Ruth Marcus, and contributing columnist Hugh Hewitt. Both, thank you very much for coming back to First Look. So I'm going to start narrow, and then we can broaden out, considering the last question I just asked Annie about the filibuster and about the impeachment trial. But when it comes to the filibuster, I'd love to get both of you, starting with Ruth, your thoughts on whether the filibuster should be obliterated, done away with.
Well, I've written a lot about the filibuster, and a little bit like President Biden, I've migrated towards much more willingness to get rid of it. I don't think that, I think there are costs to getting rid of it. You think about one of them, if we had gotten rid of the filibuster, if the Senate had gotten rid of the filibuster during the Trump administration, the Affordable Care Act would be gone. So there is a cost when the side that you don't agree with and do things by 50 votes that is really worth weighing. That said, the filibuster is not an inherent part of our constitutional structure. I would not get rid of it because of its racist use in the past. I would get rid of it or try to mitigate it or amend it or reduce it in some way. Not because of its provenance, but because of its effect right now. That said, we have reduced the filibuster. We now no longer have filibusters for judicial nominees and executive branch nominees. That's good in getting some people in place, but it's also brought us Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. So this is not as easy a choice as some people make it out to be.
What do you think, Hugh?
I would keep it, but I wanted to agree with Ruth at the end. The filibuster was ended on nominations by Harry Reid in 2013 via the nuclear option did not bother me in the least because the Constitution explicitly says the Senate, meaning the Senate as a whole, has the power to advise and consent. So I've always thought the filibuster when it came to nominees was unconstitutional. When it comes to legislation, it's simply a choice of the Senate. It's extra constitutional. They can choose to get rid of it. They can choose to retain it. I do want to read you what Joe Manchin said on November the 9th, Democrat from West Virginia. I commit to you tonight, he was on Fox News, and I commit to all of your viewers and everyone else that's watching, I want to allay those fears. I want to rest those fears for you right now, because when they talk about whether it be packing the courts or ending the filibuster, I will not vote to do that. I will not vote to pack the courts, and I will not vote to end the filibuster. And so if, in fact, the Democratic majority ends the filibuster, they will be making a liar out of Joe Manchin. So I believe it is time to have this debate and to have a vote on the filibuster, up or down, so that the American people know where every senator stands on it. I believe in the legislative filibuster because I think to remove it is destabilizing, and we will have radical swings in policy whenever the majority swings. And the majority will swing again. The Republicans will be back. They will have the three branches of government sometime in the future. And what Ruth pointed out earlier, they would have done away with Obamacare and much, much more had they not had the filibuster in 2016. But I would point as recently as December, Democrats filibustered again and again and again COVID relief. They filibustered again and again and again on a number of Tim Scott's racial justice acts. So the Democrats who are crying and the filibuster just used it. It has nothing to do with Jim Crow. It has nothing to do with the current setup of the Senate. It's simply a grab for power, and I am against it. And I hope I would be against it if the Republicans were in the majority as well.
Ruth, you've written many, well, at least one column about how it's imperative to hold Donald Trump accountable for what happened on January 6th, his violations of the Constitution and the rule of law. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is pushing to delay the impeachment trial until February. Are you concerned that if that were to happen, that it'll fall off the agenda, that the hunger for that accountability will fade the longer we go before a trial actually happens?
No, I'm not really concerned about that at all. I think it's not a matter of when it happens. The urgency of removing the president has been erased by the calendar. It's a matter of that it happens. And so so that's number one. Number two is that I think that the McConnell's request is phrased in terms of giving the president's new lawyers a chance to get up to speed and to prepare his defense. And that seems perfectly fair to me. We're not talking about pushing this off for months. The Senate has a lot of work to do. The Biden administration has a lot of work to do. So I think I would not worry about where the calendar page. What I am worried about, and I know he was going to disagree with me about this, is that the Senate is going to take what I think is the wrong decision, though not a debatable point, and that Senate Republicans are going to argue that they don't need to try the president. Of course, they're not in the majority, but it will be an off ramp for them to hold him to account or to convict him because he is no longer the president. And many of them will argue, really interested in seeing where Senator McConnell is on this, will argue that because he is no longer president, the impeachment remedy and the ability to disqualify him from future office is no longer available.
Well, have at it, Hugh. Disagree.
It's unconstitutional. Trying Donald Trump is unconstitutional. I want to read it, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor. Now, the great exposition of my position was in the Washington Post, penned by Judge J. Michael Luttig, I believe in cooperation with the wonderful editor that Ruth Marcus is, that laid out why an originalist would come to this conclusion. It simply is unconstitutional. I believe that almost every member of the Republican caucus will agree it's unconstitutional, and therefore it is a complete bit of performance art to go through with the trial. But I'd also add the 14th Amendment applies to Donald Trump as well as to everyone else, and it is unconstitutional violation of his due process to move forward. It's a bill of attainder. I'd also argue that anyone who's ever been a former official, and that would include me, I was confirmed by the Senate in 1988 by unanimous vote, by the way, including Ted Kennedy and Robert Byrd. Everyone who's a former official has got an interest in this, because if we unleash the power of impeachment on former officials, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, everyone who has ever been confirmed in their job will be facing for life the vindictiveness of a body in the Senate when it gets to a supermajority. This is a terrible idea. It's got nothing to do with Donald Trump. It is simply unconstitutional. I want to thank Ruth for getting Judge Luttig to put the definitive article in the Washington Post.
Ruth, go ahead, Ruth.
Thank you. But really quickly, you might want to read the rejoinder that Harvard Law professor, constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe wrote in response. Hugh does not have history on his side. The Senate has impeached former officials, and he doesn't, and I say this with the affection you all know I have for Hugh, he doesn't have logic on his side for this one. If it were true that you could never impeach a former official, any official who knew he was about to be convicted, who could count the votes, would simply resign and avoid the consequences of it. Doesn't make sense.
I did read Professor Tribe's piece. I also read the letter signed by, among other, Federalist Society co-founder Steve Calabrese. of law professors who disagree with the Luttig and Dershowitz position. However, I think the best resolution is for the president, President Trump, in Florida to bring a motion to enjoin the action of the Senate and for the district court, the 11th Circuit, and the Supreme Court to put aside the political question doctrine and answer this. I wonder if Ruth would agree with me that that would be a preferred course at this point.
Well, I do think that this is going to end up in court, and I do think it's a really interesting question about whether this is a political question. But Jonathan's never going to have us back if we don't let him ask us questions.
What are you kidding?
I was working through that.
This is gold. Please, I get to sit back and relax. But I do want to push back on something that Hugh said, and then we'll move on to a broader look here. And that is the idea of having an impeachment trial against Donald Trump is some sort of vindictiveness, when what it really is trying to hold accountable a former chief executive who incited people to insurrection and sedition by invading the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people while the Congress was certifying the Electoral College votes. But let's widen the aperture here. We've been through an incredible 16 days. We had the insurrection at the Capitol on a Wednesday, on the 6th. Then we had the inauguration. We've been through. Yes, I knew there was something. I knew you saw there was the hesitation. There was like, there's something big I missed. Right. Insurrection, impeachment, inauguration, in successive Wednesdays. Ruth, I'll start with you, since you are a dyed-in-the-wool journalist, and journalists are always the ones who write the first draft of history. Just your thoughts on where we've been over the last 16 days.
Some of the most astonishing, alarming, and now relieving 16 days that I've ever experienced as a citizen or as a news person. I think that what I've been thinking about is that we're all, people like me who have been appalled by the previous administration, we all are Tony Fauci now. He was almost giddy with relief when we saw him up at the White House briefing, free to speak his mind and not worry about what crazy things the president might say. So we're liberated, to use the Fauci term. And I think that the first less than 48 hours of the Biden administration has been just remarkably good given the circumstances that they inherited. I am also just so daunted by the tasks that are in front of them. I think tasks more daunting than have faced any previous president. The coronavirus, the accompanying financial situation, economic situation, the insurrection, and the just stark fact that so much of the country, not a majority by any means, believes that this is an illegitimate president. Hugh mentioned the organizing resolution in the Senate. It's kind of a metaphor for where we are. President Biden appropriately called for unity, but when the Senate can't even organize itself, and when he is facing such slim legislative majorities, he has just an enormous task on his hand, and that's really what's on my mind right now.
Hugh, your thoughts?
Well, the attack on the Capitol is a low point in Americans' right of assembly. I debate whether or not the president incited that. I have not studied it enough to do whether or not the Brandenburg test would apply, which, again, I don't want to bore our audience to death. The presentability and the intention to incite is the test, and I have not done the work necessary, nor did the House of Representatives, to determine whether or not the president incited that. But everyone who entered the Capitol, every single person who entered the Capitol without permission, ought to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I'm glad to see that they are being so prosecuted, and an example must firmly be set. I do want, however, to take, as you said, Jonathan, the scope out further and recommend to everyone in the audience a book by a professor of the left, Shoshana Zuboff, former Harvard Business School professor, wrote The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. What we are seeing come to fruition in the attack on the Capitol is the ability of very tiny groups of people, including QAnon crazies, or on the other end in Portland and Seattle, Antifa crazies, to organize and network beyond the scope of law enforcement to interdict. And it's a very dangerous development, and it's because of the rise of an unmediated internet. And so let me be the first to call for the Biden administration to get serious, if not just regulating, maybe even expropriating these engines of collective action, which are running far beyond the control of civil government to monitor and effectively cabin. It's out of control and it's dangerous to freedom.
Hugh, let me stick with you and talk about immigration. President Biden introduced a massive immigration bill on day one, and you wrote yesterday that immigration reform might be the first real test of Biden's ability to bring the country together. Do you think he can do it, and why is immigration the right place to start?
Well, because we've done a lot of work beforehand, Jonathan. In 2006 and 2013, we had efforts in both the House and both the Senate in both times that got very, very close to passing a comprehensive immigration. And that would affect not merely the 10 to 20 million people in the country without permission, but the tens of millions more who are connected to them and to the overall good health. The good news of the Trump economy, the blue collar boom in January of last year, is we don't have too many people in the United States. The economy can absorb everyone who is here. The question is, was President Biden's proposal an opening bid or a bottom line? If it was an opening bid, it's a great place to start. If it was a bottom line, it's dead on arrival, because conservatives insist on one thing: the wall be completed at least 700 miles, maybe as many as 900, and liberals insist on at least one thing: a path to citizenship, whether it's 8 years or 18 years. Both of those have to be conceded by the other side, or it's all fruitless. So I'd like to hear the president say, come, let us sit down and reason together. You're going to have the wall, conservative Republicans, but you're going to get me a path to citizenship. I think we could get there if he wants to make it happen.
Ruth, you have any thoughts on that? Otherwise, I'll ask you another question.
Well, no, I think that both sides have really fetishized the wall in a way that makes zero sense. It is really important to talk about a path to citizenship for people who are here, have lived in this country for many years, have roots and family in this country. The wall is a mirage in the sense that it is not going to deal with the question of people who are deal effectively with the question of people who are entering this country illegally. That said, if it were the price of getting a path to citizenship, it's one that I would happily pay. The question that I have is whether I took it that President Biden's releasing of this package and submission of it was a good faith offer to the Latino community and the community of immigration reform advocates to say that he was doing and not holding back in the way that President Obama did at the start of his administration. But I don't really think that this is going to be, given all of the other things that we've talked about previously, at the top of the congressional legislative agenda anytime soon.
We've got less than 2 minutes left, probably less than 90 seconds. So I just want to ask in general, and if you can say yes or no, that'd be great. Is President Biden being realistic or naive when he says, keeps pushing the notion of unity, working with Republicans? Realistic or naive? Hugh?
Realistic.
Ruth?
Realistic, because he's not just talking about unity, he's also calling out lies, and he is proposing things that he knows that are not embraced by the other side. So unify, but don't abandon your principles and don't abandon your judgment.
I wish we could do this every week. Just have you come back every week. It's always lively and entertaining, but also thought-provoking. Ruth and Hugh, we are out of time. Thank you, as always, for coming to First Look. I know. It's like, really, Hugh? Giving us homework so early on a Friday morning?
Thank you. Read the book.
Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Washington Post Live will be back at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon when we will have Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers on the state's coronavirus response, vaccine rollout, and plans for economic recovery. I'm just going to do a personal plug here. Join me on PBS NewsHour tonight. Check your local listings with I'll Be On with David Brooks for Brooks and Capehart. And then on Sunday on MSNBC, watch me on The Sunday Show, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time. As always, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Thank you for tuning in to First Look, and we'll see you next Friday on Washington Post Live.